So I just had a nice conversation with Mick about metaverse kind of things, wide-ranging conversation, rambling, not really. It was fun. And I just want to ask everyone to look at the show notes or the notes to the video description and so on, because I'm going to put a bunch of links in there and things that I think is going to be helpful for everyone. And I don't want you to miss that. So I referred to a few things in there, and Mick did as well. And I just want to provide some background information as well as a transcript on the Jim Rutt Show website of a conversation he had about the metaverse, which is very informative. And I think it'll help people. We don't go into the details because that's not our thing. We're just trying to figure things out. So if you want to delve into the details and learn more about that, I can provide those links in the description, and then you can do your own study. Okay? So thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Hey Mick, how you doing, man?
Good, mate. How are you?
I'm well. Yeah, weekend was fine. The usual kind of eating and drinking wine business. So Monday is my brain fog morning. So I'm going to do really well here today.
Half your luck.
Not that I'm trying to be coherent or eloquent or smart or anything. That would be a bridge too far. It's like, call Winston Churchill. Tell him it's all mucked up. Yeah, so I was chatting with you a little bit. We were talking about some stuff, and I appreciate your following the Facebook page and putting some really interesting videos on there, suggesting some interesting videos that I watched, and they were worth watching. They were really good. And I did a big dump of metaverse stuff, and I was reading up on metaverse stuff. This whole DeFi, which is decentralized finance, blockchain, Web3, Facebook with its metaverse play, and they changed the name of the company to Metaverse and so on.
Yeah.
And gosh, for me, it just sets alight this whole insane, bunch of shards of stuff like a bomb exploding in a chicken factory or something. There's just so much going on with it, and it's interesting for me to think that just 10 years or so ago we didn't have iPhones and stuff like that, and then 20 years ago we didn't have a commercialized web that was open. Before that we had AOL and subscription services like that, and it depended obviously if you were in at the Pentagon, or if you were in some corporation or whatever, you might have different services, network services and so on. But when all of us started getting on AOL and other things like that, did you have AOL or something in Australia?
AOL was in Australia, and I think we had Oz Email right at the start. It was sort of, I remember when the internet came in, it sort of happened slowly. There was that whole dial-up using a modem, and that was weird. I remember I was I think I was only just in high school when we got our own personal computer at home.
Right.
And the nerdy kids were the ones who knew how to connect it to the telephone line and break into BHP and all this sort of stuff,
Right. Yeah.
And but that was back when you had to, your phones were still connected to the wall, and you had to, you couldn't. Someone who had a portable phone at home was rich,
Right. And they were huge. Remember that? It's like those old World War II movies, or you have a G.I. Joe or something. They got those big radios, It's like,
yeah.
Over and out. Over and out.
You
Roger
look,
that. Oh yeah,
you
you have
look at
to
it
hold.
back now, and I remember when I first started working. If I think back on the mobile phone I had when I first started work, people would be thinking I was calling in air support.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be
But
some kind of military
yeah,
application.
it was. But look, then when the internet sort of hit, it was also innocent to start with. You know, you could look up. We all got excited that there was two things you could do on the internet. One was to look up facts and figures and the Encyclopedia Britannica, and the other one was to look at boobs.
Yeah,
And you know,
it's still like that, except we have Wikipedia and we have Google, and we have, you know, now we have streaming sites where people get on, you know, and they just do whatever nasty thing they want to do in front of the camera, and they get tipped for it.
Yeah, I remember too. It was, I mean, the big thing was chat rooms. You could get into a chat room and you could talk to a whole range of people, or you could go off and have a side chat, and it was revolutionary. And
Did you have MySpace? Did you have that MySpace? And
when I finally decided to be one of the cool kids, I created a MySpace account, and I think within a month I wasn't using MySpace anymore. Everyone was on Facebook, and apparently that was the place to be. And
well, I guess I'm how much older than you am I then? I must be at least 10 years difference, because yeah, I remember doing, well, I did all of it basically. If something came out, I would go on and get it, you know, Blogspot on Google, or MySpace with MSM or whatever it was. Yeah, so yeah, I would get anything, and then I would try it out for a while and get bored, you know. It was,
yeah,
I really liked sharing pictures, photos, because I would travel and I'd be in another country working, and I'd put up photos and my friends could see it back in the States. And, you know, I could write a little blog post or something, put a photo up. And I thought that was really cool. And I liked hyperlinks were great, because you can link to some article on the web or something like that. But it's all foggy for me, because I remember being the early adopter that I am, you know, in the 80s, having a computer, and then in the 90s, early 90s, getting on the internet immediately. When you would download a file, it would take like a half a day. So you'd start downloading, and then you'd go out and do whatever you had to do and come home, and, you know. So yeah, and then getting interested in the business opportunities in the mid 90s, you know, websites and things like that. So once these computer languages came along, and it became, and the APIs, the application, you know, protocols, interfaces, all these different things came along, and you started to get useful stuff like websites and search engines, directories like Yahoo and so on. And it just seemed to me like everything's going to be really fantastic, and there's lots of business opportunities here and so on. When you reflect on people like Bill Gates, or not so much Steve Jobs, but what's his name? Wozniak? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
So, I mean, these guys that, like, Bill Gates is young, and he's pretty privileged and really, really smart. And he's shrewd and driven, you know, basically one of those kind of borderline sociopathic, you know, super ambitious kind of guys. But, you know, I'm not judging him. I don't know him, but he had this idea that, you know, everybody's going to have a personal computer, you know, and I'm going to make an operating system for it. I mean, what an idea to have as a young man.
Yeah.
And without going into the whole history of the pirates of Silicon Valley and all that stuff. God, that's just amazing to me, his background and how he built Microsoft and whatnot. But my basic point is, without going into a million different things, I was interested in all of it as it comes along, and I'm an early adopter type. So, you know, I would get on and play around with it and think, you know, what can I do with it? Can I, you know, make business or get attention or use it as a tool for something? And it was really exciting. And I just don't know the transition points. You live through it and it just happens to you, right? Suddenly you have a personal computer. Suddenly you have a modem and you're connecting to the internet. All of a sudden you have a website, you have a search engine. Google's not that old.
No.
And it's global and it's powerful as hell. Facebook is not that old, and it's global and it's powerful as hell. And you know, Zuckerberg is not an idiot either. He's a really smart guy. And look at what he's done to corner the market in social media with Facebook, and the acquisitions and then the R&D that they can afford to do, both in hardware and software. Man, pretty soon you've got this guy who's almost like a government, you know, the totalitarian dictator of his own business universe that can tell us what to do. I always get booted from Facebook because I post like 5 articles on something, you know, 5 or 6. Of course, 2 of them are from some controversial sources, maybe. It's kind of like a game. Can you spot the controversial links in this group of posts? If so, you get a lollipop. It's an NFT. You could go and buy it at this exchange with my lollipop coin or something like that. So yeah, so it just happens so fast, you know. Suddenly you're like, oh yeah, I'm on Facebook, you know. Oh yeah, I have Instagram. Oh yeah, Facebook bought Instagram. Facebook bought WhatsApp, you know, on and on and on. And it just builds and builds, and the momentum. And then you have people who are antitrust, anti-monopoly kind of people who are commenting on the dangers of this, that, and the other thing. But everybody's there, right? So you're kind of roped into it. You got to be on YouTube because everybody's there. You got to be on Facebook because everybody's there. But then the young people, the Gen Z folks, are like, Facebook's so passe, man. Who would go on Facebook? You know, I use this, that, and the other thing, and TikTok and whatever. You know, it's not cool. My grandmother uses Facebook, and you're going, oh my God, really?
Yeah.
So the point is, you know, you don't know anything about it, and suddenly it winds up in your pocket.
Exactly, yeah.
And then you become dependent on it. It becomes central to your life. You know, you're in the cafe with a really beautiful girlfriend and several other friends, and all these beautiful young people around you, and you're all looking at a screen, you know. So
well, if you don't post if you don't post it on Facebook, it never happened.
Exactly.
It's like, I remember seeing that meme. It was what's his name, Lawrence Fishburne from The Matrix, and it said, "Did you know that you could actually go to the gym and not post it on Facebook?" And it was like, that must be a revelation to some people. But I remember probably 11, 12 years ago, Facebook became so ubiquitous and so part of everyone's life so quickly that to run a business, you had to be on Facebook. And I was a photographer doing weddings and things like that. And you had to be on Facebook so that you could promote yourself. You could tag your clients and you could get known that way. And they wanted the photos on Facebook, and you could do that for them. And then Instagram came. A few years later became, you know, so next thing you know, you're doing the work, and then you've got to upload stories about your work onto all these platforms. Other photographers were quick to work out that you could earn money through YouTube doing photographic tutorials and things like that as well. So it infiltrated us in such a way that, like everything,
right,
you thought it was good for you right at the start, and you needed it, and it was more efficient. And I could see even then, without the ads and all that sort of stuff, it was more efficient advertising because you could get the people who knew people. It was that word of mouth exponentially, and you could target your audience. And then when the ads came in, and I was wanting to run ads for a course I was doing or something, I could very, very specific about who would see the ad and work out who would be interested. And it became a great tool in that regard. But, you know, probably in the excitement of it all, I didn't realize that same tool was being used on me for other things as well. And it became a new way of doing things. I suppose, you know, the printing press was the revolutionary thing at the time, and newspapers, and then ads in newspapers. And yeah, you know, you wanted to sell something, you had to ring up the local newspaper and get the ad in, you know, and if they spelt it wrong, you were stuffed. And or if they put the wrong phone number in there. This was it's just that on steroids. So I'm wondering,
right,
what's as revolutionary as this was, and how reliant we've become on it. We used to be reliant on newspapers to get our information. We were reliant on so many things. The internet and the Facebook, Google, Apple sort of world, or virtual world. What is the revolutionary thing that's going to overtake that?
We didn't have any clue. We don't have a clue where it's coming from, right? It just drops on us suddenly, and then we're dependent on it, addicted to it. Then we start to think about that and wonder if it's good or bad, and we start talking about governance, who's in charge, antitrust issues, monopoly issues, all this stuff with these big global corporations that have such a huge impact on us. So I asked you, you know, what do you think about the metaverse? And you said, I haven't really read much about it, but in a way we're being groomed for it. You know what I mean? Or we have been, just naturally by the evolution of all these technologies and their invasion into our lives and cultures. We're being groomed for it. You know, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy.
No, that's it. And when you think about it, or when I think about it, and I said, I haven't read too much on this. Well, I've been living it. It's been happening right in front of my eyes. And when I take a step back, I go, oh, hang on. I have been reading a lot about this. It's everywhere. But when it comes to things like blockchain and
DeFi,
you know, crypto,
decentralized, Web3, all that kind of stuff.
Money, yeah, that is look, that's been the stuff of fantasy for a little while, but with everything, the growth in technology is exponential. So, you know, when we thought, oh, that's years away, well, that's only 2 years away. It's not 20 years away. It's here now, and people have been talking about cryptocurrency for a few years now. It gained momentum. It's almost like it's built a myth around itself. It's going to be, you know, it's going to happen because we said it's going to happen, because we talked about it.
By the way, only big shareholders talk about when it's going to happen, or it's 2 years away. So you got to be Elon Musk, you know. I don't know why we can't have flying cars like tomorrow. By the way, I'm on the spectrum, so I'm special. And, you know, this is not so hard. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
Anytime you want to
Uh,
pump and dump something, you're going to say, oh, this, I don't see why we can't do that in, let's say, third quarter, and then 5 years later, it's like, yeah, we're almost there. We have a couple of stumbling blocks,
Yeah.
mostly regulatory, but I think like maybe 4 weeks from now, we'll have it. We'll be launching like 20,000 rockets a day in a nature reserve in Florida, and it's this kind of crazy stuff. Yeah, I was just joking there,
but meanwhile, his share price has gone through the roof. The company hasn't turned a profit ever, as far as I'm aware, but it's worth a lot. But this cryptocurrency, it's a little bit like that. I forget the term, but it's, well, if you just talk about it enough, it'll become true. And so if you make people think they need cryptocurrency, then they will, and then they start seeing that people are getting into it, which is massive profits to be made, then everyone starts getting into the fear of missing out. But it's like, well, what is this cryptocurrency all about? What is it that it was designed for? It's more than just
use cases, right?
Yeah.
What's the value in my life? What's the added value, or what's it do for me? How can I use it for various things?
Well, when I first looked at cryptocurrencies, I was thinking, yeah, this is just bullshit. This is something that someone's made up, and we're all, but I'm starting to get worried a little bit now, because it seems that cryptocurrencies, NFTs and things are going to be what you need to be able to participate in this Web3, in this new generation. It's
and one of the key concepts of all this is decentralized. And I think, it's like, if I think about the metaverse and having my X's, ones and zeros in a server farm somewhere, And by the way, we talked about, or I'm obsessed with Vaclav Smil nowadays, because I'm looking again at the energy situation and how it permeates everything in modern civilization. And, that's a whole other story, but it's important even in terms of the metaverse, because we're going to have server farms, running this. So, I mean, these take energy. There's a lot of, computers in a space, running all this, and data storage and whatnot. And the decentralized aspect of it, from what I understand from Bitcoin, right? Blockchain, is that you have all these computers, everyone running nodes around the world. And some of them are big mining operations. And in the old days, I had a Raspberry Pi, and you just stick it in your PC, and you're mining Bitcoin. It's a novelty. It's just something goofy to do. You don't know why you're doing it. Maybe you read the Satoshi's white paper, and you're getting some ideas that could be interesting. And like you say, you don't know, but you're kind of curious about it. And then it winds up in your pocket somehow, and you don't know how that happened. And the other thing that scares me about the metaverse and all this stuff is, at some point, governance is a problem, obviously, whether it's corporate governance or, just governance within a community or whatever. Now we have smart contracts, which means that we can make contracts, put it on a blockchain, and it's transparent, and people can agree to it, sign on to it. Everything we're talking about are issues of trust, which is the same thing with fiat currency and central banking. None of this is conspiratorial. There are iterative innovations that come along, and then politics gets involved with it, and power and money and influence gets involved, and then they decide, we're going off the gold standard, we're going to do things differently. And then modern monetary theory comes along to explain some of it, why it's not a big deal just to add more money to the ledger, right? And then you have Bitcoin, which you can quantify how much energy went in to generating that Bitcoin key or code. and calling it a Bitcoin, you know,
Yeah.
that unit of measure. You know exactly how much energy went into it, how much energy went into making it at a given moment in time, and so on, how long it took to solve the problem, the mathematical problem, so on and so forth. So it's very, very quantifiable, very clear, right? And you know, our trust in the central banking system, and I'm not going to go into this because I'm not an advocate of any of it, because you and I are we're all in this anyway, because we're human beings living in 2022. We can't get out of it unless we go live in a cave somewhere and, you know, decide that we're going to hunt snakes for protein and gather, you know, tubers from the forest or something like that. We're in this, whether we like it or not. So it's all coming on really quick, you know, as it seems to come on faster and faster. So we've had iPhones for whatever, how many years? How many? Was it 2009 or something when they came out?
Yeah, 2008, 2009, yeah.
And then rapidly the technology got better and better. You know, it's just like streaming got better and better.
But I'll just put my
4G,
hand up.
3G, yeah, go ahead.
Just like I was, I did MySpace before I clocked on to the fact that everyone was using Facebook. I bought a BlackBerry just when people were about to buy iPhones.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Late to the, you know, a day late and a dollar short as usual. But so I suppose I'm an example of being dragged into the inertia of what's going to happen.
So it's interesting. So the really smart people are thinking ahead, like Bill Gates thinking everybody is going to need an operating system and it's going to have to be like this.
Yeah.
And once certain people see ahead and do something, we get dragged into it. It doesn't mean it's the best thing that could have been designed, right?
No.
It's not the optimum. There's no democratic process. It's just there and we start using it and we get used to using it. And then that's the best of all possible worlds, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah. And then you constantly have this war with technology. And this is a bit mundane, but it's realistic, I suppose. Is technology is always having a war. It's an economic, it's a commercial war. So when you have, say, Bill Gates comes out and he creates this operating system, then you have Steve Jobs having a competing operating system. And if you were a third or a fourth party in this, then we don't know, we can't remember who you are. You know what I mean? Like, because it became a duopoly and it became a choice, a simple choice of Apple or Microsoft. And the whole world basically depended on. And then when Microsoft and Apple devices started being able to talk to each other, then it became well, all bets were off after that. So, but you look at technologies as they come out now, say, for instance,
and also that narrative that you just said, that binary kind of narrative, that's also an illusion, because there were a lot of other things going on all the time that got crushed in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
So the rivalrous game A thing that the GameBers talk about, this is one of these inevitable conflicts, you know, that are just kind of baked into the system. It's structural and it's just the way things are done, and the rules are kind of there, and we operate under certain rules and constraints and so on. And then, you have, okay, this guy won and that guy lost, but there were a lot of other people that got crushed on the way. I just want to make that point. It's always like that.
It is. Even these days, you know, when we do get a technology, there's a lot of competition in there to get there, but someone does make that one innovation that gives them that step ahead, and that becomes the standard. And that's the competition, is to become the standard. So whether it be GPS devices that give you navigational tools and things like that. You've only got a few reputable players in that space.
Mhm.
And then governments get on board, usually about 10 years late, and say, oh, well, we're going to leverage off technology, and we're going to say everyone's got to have this. It might be truck drivers needing to upload an electronic diary instead of a logbook.
Yeah, and
Well,
we have to understand that the total kind of three-dimensional ecosystem of this too, because it's not linear or teleological. It's not going from one thing to a given ideal. And all the players involved are involved all the time, various levels. So their involvement is going up and down, like a recording kind of image. But like, you know, because you have publicly funded technologies being taken up by the private sector and innovated on, and then put into the market and create a business. And then you have regulators coming in from politics, from governments, because they figure out that it has to be regulated for one reason or another. It could be antitrust, it could be safety, it could be dozens of other reasons, and it could even be political, you know, just ideological. So yeah, so these, yeah, like you say, suddenly now they're getting involved because they feel they have to be involved, and all these other players come in. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, but then when a government does want to adopt a technology, usually years after people have said we should be adopting a technology, then it's a race to which becomes the standard that everyone's now got to conform to, a bit like the VHS beta situation. Okay, well, we're going to create all this product. To do it on such a massive scale, we need it to be one format. So who wins?
Right.
And
and that's important too, because, you know, it's not usable unless everybody can get on, and it's scalable, right? So you have to decide how the stop sign is shaped. I don't know why in Portugal stop signs look like American stop signs, and it says stop on it. It doesn't say alto, it says stop. There's some kind of universal thing about a stop sign or a red light or something. Of course, it's more complicated what you're talking about. It's more complex, but yeah, these kind of standards, right? So even in medicine, you have, you know, standards of care and so on. And these things change all the time. And this is why I'm having so much fun rereading Karl Popper now, because he's constantly critiquing his own ideas and other people's ideas about rationality, what science is, scientific method. He's a philosopher of science, philosophy, and so on and so forth. But the main value there is you have to be humble, and you have to understand the reality now, the way we think about things in this context at the moment is going to be different in another context and moment, and for other applications and reasons and so on. And to be rational about it, you have to admit that you really don't know everything, and you don't know how it's all going to wind up. But that's another thing. But I think, you know, it's interesting. You can read these people that were writing, you know, decades and decades ago, and they're just so switched on because there's something there. There's some truth there, some reality there. But yeah, getting back to what you were saying.
Yeah, well, I think that it's like what we touched on our previous discussion, was these people that were already envisaging some of these issues back in the 60s and 70s. They know how humans behave. They know how competition works. And when you put that knowledge to future technologies, they can read how this is going to happen. Because this is how it's always happened.
Yeah, and that's tricky too, because, you know, looking at various domains in psychology, in biology, evolution, evolutionary theory, anthropology, cross-cultural comparisons and so on. It's really difficult to say how things have always been. I mean, there's a certain way we can look at a human being and say that this is a human being. How do we know that?
Yeah.
Opposable thumbs, language, they walk upright, they're hairless, more or less, whatever. But yeah, there are certain things about us that are kind of universal, and we can see it and we know it intuitively. Like when you travel and you say, oh, gee, gosh, these people from Azerbaijan are just like us. It's like, gosh, they're human beings, And you see that on the other side where you dehumanize people, where you're trying to say, like they it happens all the time, cyclically. And of course, it has been traditional in cultures for millennia. But, the barbarians, they're not like us, people with a certain skin pigmentation are inferior. Women just can't think, we have these ideas. And when you read books written way back when, you see these things, right? And it's not that long ago, when if you were gay in the UK, you could be put to death, and people really, like, class really meant something important. We need a certain kind of person to take control and manage things, because the peasants just don't have the capacity to do so. And then you can jump forward to Sewell, who's a philosopher in our time, who has a much more nuanced view. He's an African-American philosopher who understands that if you take a person without a quality education, who happens to have a certain skin pigmentation, out of an urban city somewhere, I don't want to name names because I don't want to piss people off, but if you take them out of that environment, single family home, no money, no quality education, a lot of hard knocks, and you stick them in Harvard just because they're a certain color, they're probably not going to do very well, because there's a foundation there, right? Bill Gates made Microsoft because he had a certain foundation in culture and family and with money, with white privilege, with whatever, right? So these circumstances really matter. The context, the circumstances from which you emerge matter, and they can change your nature in subtle ways. They can make you less angry, less easy to anger, healthier, less stressed out, or they can do the opposite, depending on your circumstances and so on. So yeah, human nature is interesting because yes, we definitely have a human nature. There's no doubt about that. But what is that? Where does that come from? And what's the spectrum of it? What are human beings like in different cultures and different settings? So the Margaret Mead thing, anthropology and culture and so on. These are really important issues.
But I think that's just there where you're at, just at that point. It's interesting that different cultures are at different stages, right? So you've got the Western culture, America, Europe, Australia, that where we're at that technological, we're at the forefront of it. We're at the pointy end. And then you've got other cultures who have only basically got basic internet in their country or whatever, Do they need it? Do they need all this technology to get by? Yes, only because the rest of us are doing it.
Yeah,
but
well, that's also complex, because then we're talking about what is economic growth? What kind of economic growth do we need? How do we feed people? How do we educate people? How do we govern people? Do we need democracies, or do we need dictatorships or whatever? And why is this country in Africa behind us? Is colonialism, does that have anything to do with it? And
Oh yeah.
on and on and on, exploitation, global corporations extracting wealth and taking it back home and making added value with technological products that are really expensive and then exporting them around the world in terms of our services and whatnot, because these things just build on each other. You know, why? And you know, it's easy to point your finger and say, oh, it's colonialism, or it's structural racism, or it's this, that, or the other thing, and not understand just how complex it is that we happen to evolve in a certain way and become a certain kind of thing. And when you say Western civilization, that's huge. What are you talking about? And what point in history are you talking about? And the funny thing is, this all segues into the metaverse, because whatever's going on in there is going on out here. And if we can't understand what's going on out here and can't govern it well and can't live in peace and have the certain kind of pauperesque kind of progress across the board universally as human beings, as Homo sapiens sapiens, part of a big family, you know, then we're gonna bring this horrible dystopia into the metaverse. Otherwise, we're gonna have a whole bunch of really kind of like holodecks, Star Trek, where we're just having a great time. You know, I traveled around the world last night in 5 minutes because I have a time dilating machine that takes me into the, you know. So the technology is always a multi-edged sword. It can be a bomb with a lot of shrapnel in it, or it can be a warm, fuzzy hot tub with a lot of really beautiful people floating around.
That's it. We haven't got this world sorted properly, and we're already creating a new virtual world. And we are going to take all the human traits and all our class systems and everything into that new metaverse.
And we're experts at it now because we see what happens on Facebook. And whether or not you think that troll farms in whatever country doing black ops, you know, trying to mess with people, creating memes and whatever. If you think that's not a big deal, or it's a big deal or whatever, or only they do it, you know, these kind of people do that, we never do it. Or if we do it, we do it for the right reasons, because we have freedom and democracy, and we have human rights and civil rights. Canadians don't even have any rights. You can look it up. They have no rights. But, you know, so social norms and whatnot. I mean, we get all this misinformation. You know, Eric Trump today was on some show, and he was going, vaccines are bullshit. You should be able to choose. How come a woman talks about her body and her choosing her reproductive rights, and then we don't get to choose whether we have a vaccine or not? You know, these are stupid analogies, really dumb, because vaccination has nothing to do with like deciding if you want to have a family or not. You know, it's so ridiculous. And then just blanketly saying it's dumb. And then he went into the freedom thing. They're taking away all of our freedoms. This guy, JP Sears, who's a redheaded, long red hair, buff guy from Canada, who's a comedian, and he's pretty funny and he's really smart. He goes to the End the Mandates demonstration in Washington, DC, and he's up there going, do you love freedom? Do you know, tell me if you love freedom. And everybody's cheering, and he's mentioning God and talking about freedom. And you know, if we have any of these mandates, which is what an election is, by the way. So we elect Barack Obama president because we're giving him a mandate, maybe some of the voters were, to end corrupt banking systems and regulate the derivatives market, and just do some good things for people and get us out of the forever wars and stop the drones and all that. And then it turns out he doesn't do any of that because he's an apologist for the system too. So he had a mandate, but he didn't give a shit about the mandate. And a medical mandate is different. If you're saying that we need seatbelts, or we need measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination for kids because it's really dangerous for kids, or we want to have vaccinations now because we don't want all our old people to die of some stupid little virus. It's such a different thing, but they lump it all together. So they say something that's true, and then they put a belief behind that, something that they believe ideologically, or they want to say because they're a clique of people like that. And it's just all jumbled together. It makes no sense. It's ridiculous, but it hooks you in because they say one thing that's true, you know. Like, so these guys are screaming about freedom, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, dudes, like, man, I don't know if you noticed or not, but like, North America's pretty freaking free, man. It's like, I've been around the world, and we can do almost anything here. And you can go on any show and have any platform, and you can say a whole bunch of stupid shit, and you're free to do it. These guys have their, you know, the evangelical guy gets up there and screams and yells about freedom and God. He's free to go on planes, trains, and automobiles to that demonstration and say whatever the fuck he wants. You know what I mean?
I always like it though. These when they make comparisons, they always pick the absolute worst of one thing and compare it to the absolute best of their thing.
Yeah, straw manning type.
Straw manning for the max. And there's a thing. I've always said this, and it's not me that's the only one saying this, but as soon as someone invokes Nazi Germany, you know that they've run out of proper arguments, because everything's, this is not Nazi Germany. Well, hang on, no. In Nazi Germany, they probably would have found the people they didn't like and given them a virus. They wouldn't have provided vaccines. They wouldn't have, you know, done all this sort of stuff. But it's always good to invoke that emotion of Nazi Germany. This is not North Korea. No, it's fucking not. The fact that you're actually sitting there saying this proves that it's not. You get these people that ring up, and they ring up the talk show that's got like 500,000 or 5 million listeners. You can't even say such and such anymore. Well,
and he's saying it. You're just saying it.
And that's the thing, when they, and look, I'm an Australian, but we get America, the United States of America is very influential. And we don't, whilst I don't like butting into other people's countries' politics, the fact of the matter is that America is powerful in that it's influential, and what happens in America is of interest to most of the world, because if it goes to shit in America, it's probably going to go to shit everywhere else. And
also America's going to say that all the dictators that they're supporting are causing shit, but they're supporting all the dictators, and anybody who doesn't want to go along with Uncle Sam gets bombed. You know, they get the special forces, Delta forces going in, man. They just, powerful countries and people just cause a lot of shit just because they're powerful.
Just because they're influential. But we do take an interest in what happens in America. And when you have this sort of argument going on, everything's so binary. You're either for us or against us, that sort of thing. There's no room for nuance. And the polarization that we're seeing in America is affecting, and it's becoming the same in places like Australia, where the cult of personality, you don't have to be of substance, you just have to be a celebrity, and that automatically gives you a megaphone to sprout your shit.
So imagine these guys, all these guys, JP Sears and all these like freedom lover people who just don't want to get vaccinated, and they don't want anybody else, to tell them what to do. My analogy is they're like kids throwing a temper tantrum when their mommy tells them to eat their vegetables. I'm not going to eat my vegetables, mommy. No, I'm not. I don't care if I never eat again. I'm never coming down to dinner. I'm not eating vegetables. You know, it's that kind of thing. And they're on and on about it. They're never going to give up. You know,
No, but
don't
see,
tell
then
me
it
what to do, dude. I'm free. You know, you're taking away my freedoms.
Yeah. But when you talk about your freedoms, you've actually given away your freedom by, oh, well, if I get the vaccine, it's no longer a question of, is this something that I personally should do to protect myself or whatever? It becomes, if I get the vaccine, then I'm anti-freedom.
Right. Yeah, come on.
So how did freedom infiltrate a scientific medical argument?
Freedom within constraints, right?
Yeah, so, but if you choose not to get the vaccine, then you've chosen not to get the vaccine for your own personal reasons. If you choose to get the vaccine for your own personal medical reasons, you're not anti-freedom. You're actually for freedom. And I don't want
also
to
concepts
about
of freedom.
vaccines, you know? But I don't want to argue about you should get vaccinated or you shouldn't get vaccinated. I think my point is that the whole discussion of vaccines efficacy and stuff has been co-opted and actually removed from a medical scientific discussion to a political discussion and a tribal discussion. So that if I get vaccinated, but I'm for this other thing, then I might lose my friends because now all of a sudden I'm a tyrant because I personally got a vaccine.
Well, it all boils down to this, okay? My system, my ideology, that's what freedom is, and yours isn't. And whether you interpret the Constitution in a certain way or an amendment in the Constitution a certain way, it's all ideological. It has nothing to do with truth, rationality, science,
and that's where you have free speech. You know, the Americans talk about free speech and cancel culture and all this sort of stuff. When you said that thing that you said, did someone come along and take you to jail? Exactly. No, that is freedom of speech. But when you do say something, whether it be a bigoted thing on a YouTube channel or whether it be a political speech to the masses or whether it's an article that you write in a big publication, once you've said it, then everyone else has their right to free speech to rebut what you said. And if you say something really stupid and I point out that it's stupid and show how it's stupid, I haven't taken away your freedom of speech.
No, you've just disagreed with
exercised my own, you know. So, and that's what we've conflated counter argument these days with cancel culture. And I know there is a thing. I know that, and you know, it's been happening for millennia. But the same people that espouse free markets and pure capitalism are the first people to get the shits when the market reacts against them.
Yeah, exactly.
And
well,
when we're talking the metaverse terms, like I said before, we're going to take all this with us. Yeah. And it's already become this. It's become a virtual world where the truth is whatever you want it to be because you can create your own bubble.
Yeah, and this is what I wanted to say about that you know, stop the mandate thing. Okay, all of these guys are buying real estate now, which means server space on the metaverse, and they're calling it real estate. And they're getting ready to preach in there, and they're getting ready to do their comedy in there, and they're getting ready to do their shock jock talk shows in there, and they're getting ready to sell toothpaste in there, and they're getting ready to do porn in there, and they're getting ready to do everything that we already have. But it's going to be 3D. See, Mark's thing's going to be in 3D, and you can wear goggles and see it in 3D and have some other things you could do. It's still a very nascent kind of goofy thing. But then you add different ideas, different types of currencies to that, blockchain, smart contracts, decentralized finance, Web3, And all of this is going to evolve. We don't know how fast it's going to happen or how soon or what it's going to turn into. And you're going to have some people, these AOL gated community things where Mark tells you what you can say and what you can't. You know, this is our user agreement and this is what we do and don't do here, which is fine. And you agreed to it. Of course, it's 5,000 pages, so you didn't read it at all. You just scrolled down to the bottom and clicked OK.
It'll make mobile phone contracts look like a storybook. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but these guys are getting ready to go in there, right? They're not going to be free in there. There's no freedom. There are constraints everywhere. Like, you know, you have to take your goggles off before you go into the bathroom and take a shit. That's a constraint. Why can't I just shit in the virtual space? You know, whatever.
Yeah.
Why do I have to?
You could be in the virtual space, but the reality is that you're still going to be in the real space. And
you're going to have people messing with you, just like in the real world, you know.
You are. And you've just mentioned how a couple of times now how much energy is going to be needed to keep this going. Now, like it or lump it or whatever your opinion is, when you mine something like lithium or gas or whatever,
I'm glad you brought this up.
It takes a lot of energy to mine it, but you get something tangible from that, right? All that energy that you've put in there is to get something. This metaverse is all this energy is going to be consumed to create what? You can't hold it. You can't create something.
Are you familiar with the paperclip maximizer thing? You know, you have this AI and somehow it gets it in the programming that the best thing for humanity is to make paper clips. And that's what humanity wants. And so this AI is robotic and it can iterate on itself and reproduce itself. And it just turns the whole universe into paper clips because it can't stop, you know. So it's kind of that kind of thing where, okay, this data is on servers in a server farm somewhere, or maybe it's decentralized and it's on a bunch of computers, nodes of computers around the world.
Yeah.
And I have a mansion in there and I have icons and I have NFTs, I have all this kind of stuff. I have currency I'm buying and selling. And I'm sitting there with my headset on in a room someplace, wishing, you know, taking vitamin D pills and everything because I haven't been out in the sun for days. It's so crazy. And it requires a lot of energy to do all this stuff, right? Obviously. You know, you've got to have more and more server farms, you got to have more and more computers on the network. You have to have better and better network technologies. And like you say, we're getting to a point in time now where getting to the low-hanging fruit is not possible anymore because it's not there. If you're talking about copper, if you're talking about oil and gas, we're getting to a point. I don't know when that peak oil or peak copper or peak lithium is going to happen, but it's going to happen. And the energy inputs to get it suddenly make it kind of useless to try anymore because it's just not going to be profitable for anybody. And we're not in a world where you have a resource-based economy where you're thinking about the optimizing the resources we have for maximum sustainability for future generations. We could care less about that. I just want my car. I just want this, that, the other thing. And by the way, I also want my metaverse. And so it's spiraling out of control and we're not thinking about it. Nobody's thinking about it. So it's just going to wind up on our head. So the smartphone's in our pocket, you know, toasting our yarb rolls. And the goggle's going to be on our head, toasting our brain, you know, in the future. And somebody's going to have to build all this stuff. Meanwhile, we're trying to go to zero carbon, which is going to, you know, all these things that are electrifying the world is going to take a lot of oil and gas and coal energy to do it. And then we're going to have to figure out you know, material science, material technology and all that are going to have to evolve quickly to make it, you know, easier, less and less expensive to create this green technology and whatnot. All that's happening at once. So when Schmachtenberger's talking about this kind of stuff, or anybody, you know, it's like, yeah, all these things are happening at once. And then a lot of people are saying it's not happening or it doesn't matter, you know. Global warming doesn't matter. Global cooling would be much, much worse. We know that. You know, it's like nobody's thinking about this cheap oil and gas that we got, you know, a couple hundred years ago that made it possible to make all this stuff in the first place. We just take it for granted. You know, all of this metal, the aluminum, all the plastics and everything. Are we going to make new materials out of algae? And what energy inputs are we going to have to make the plastic out of algae, right?
Yeah.
So we're going into these more and more complex systems that nobody understands, which is going to go towards my black box discussion in the future. Because I'd like to ask you, what are you an expert in? What do you know? Like, is it bicycle mechanics? Is it iambic pentameter? You know, is it literary criticism? Is it like electronics? Is it ham radio? What do you know that you can confidently say you understand how that system works?
Me? Well, you put me on the spot by saying what I'm an expert in, but what I'm an expert in, I suppose, what I do for a living is safety systems and well-being and how to do work health and safety sort of thing, how to make your operational environment safe, or as safe as it could be or it should be.
And that's complex. That has a lot of domains in it, right? Because you're talking about physical health, you're talking about securing plants and equipment, you're talking about systems that are efficient, that make people feel better, I guess. I don't know, but there's a lot of things going on.
But it draws on so many things because you're talking about, ultimately, it's about people. And it's about risk mitigation, really, because safe is such a very safe word. It's absolute.
Risk management.
When we drive a car, people say, I have a safe car. Well, you don't really have a safe car. You have a car that reduces quite a number of risks compared to other cars. Volvo, for instance, they get it. They know that humans are humans and that humans will crash their car. So what they try to do is build a car that reduces the risk to as close to zero of anyone dying in one of their cars. And when we have that binary thinking in safety of it's either safe or it's not, that's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. It's what are you going to do to reduce the risk? And there's a hierarchy of controls that we like to talk about, you know, elimination of the hazard being number one, right down to, well, if you can't eliminate it, you can't engineer it out or engineer a solution, then you'll give some people some protective equipment to wear when they're dealing with it. So, and that's where you have to go through that hierarchy of controls to understand what is the cost benefit analysis of all of this. There are some things that are just too dangerous to do. There is no current system in place. There is no current technology to reduce the risk to an acceptable level when you think about the benefit at the other end.
So when you look starships.
So when you look at the things that you need to put in place to fly a plane is a lot more technical, a lot more complicated, and a lot stricter than the things that you put in place to ride a bicycle around an enclosed track.
And it's also amazing how the safety record of flight is. It's a miracle.
Because it's serious
just
stuff.
what you're talking about. I mean, these people have really broken everything down and figured out bit by bit how to make it safer and safer over time.
And it's constantly, technology is taking over. And just quickly, and I think it has some consistencies and connections with what we're saying. Some pilots I've heard lament that planes are so technologically driven these days, or flown, that the pilot actually is almost a passenger nowadays as well. The technologies take the plane into the air, the technologies bring the plane down safely and all this sort of stuff. And then you've got autopilot and it's flying by itself anyway. And then when shit gets real, something happens and your systems fail, then the experience of the pilot comes into play, of feeling how the plane is maneuvering through the air. There's a famous airline incident that occurred involving a Qantas A380, where something came off one of the engines came off, took out a bit of the wing. The pilots actually then had to use their decades of experience to fly the plane, rather than, and the computer systems weren't any value to them at that point. And so we can get things to a point where we have desensitized ourselves to the actual hazard and risk that we're about to enter, because
that's a huge point, by the way. That's really, really,
and we become reliant. We become reliant on those things working 100% of the time, and nothing does. And that segue into what we're talking about as we go into what we're referring to as a metaverse. And like you said earlier, who knows what that really is going to look like? What are the things that we need to be thoughtful of personally and as a community entering into such things? Because we're being dragged into it. We like it or lump it. Where it's going to happen, it is happening. Like you said, these people are already prepared. They've already got their comedy routines to do once inside, and they've got their own currency being developed and all sorts of stuff. So what are the checks and balances that we need to put in place to keep people, keep their feet on the ground, so to speak, keep them in reality, not a virtual reality.
And it always circles back to education, ongoing personal education, growth, understanding how things work. Because I can tell you, I'm not an expert in anything. I might be able to set up my camera to take a shallow depth of field shot of my cat, or something, but I'm not an expert. And I'll never be an expert in anything. And Karl Popper talks about this problem with experts. It's about the rational process, the scientific process. That's what matters, and understanding to the best of our ability how things work at this moment. If it's physics and engineering, that's different. You might be, what's the load-bearing capacity of this floor or this roof or this bridge? Aerodynamics, aeronautics, and so on. There are certain things that, in engineering that you can pretty much nail down, and in physics as well. But then when you get into quantum mechanics and so on, things just get really, really complex and difficult. And it's the same thing with human beings and the way we think and reason things through and sort things out. So, governance is important. So when these morons talk about freedom, they don't understand that freedom exists within constraints, because you may think you're free to fly when you jump off the building, but you're gonna die when you hit the ground. If you want everybody to just do whatever the heck they want all the time, you're going to be surrounded by people that are going to be making you feel like shit, because I don't want to do that. Who decides? Who decides? Who watches the watchers? Who decides what the rules are? Who creates the rules for the game and so on. What's fair, what's not fair. These things are always in flux. They're never sorted out. They're never ever fixed completely. They're evolving, they're emerging, they're changing based on circumstances, based on fashion, based on a billion things, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, the one thing I would like people to do, if they could possibly, like these freedom freaks, you know, they're talking about God, right? They all have their own interpretation of what God wants based on their sect, you know. And somehow they're putting themselves in the shoes of God and thinking they know what God thinks. I just don't get that at all.
Well,
They have their opinion, they have their ideology, and you can be free if you believe the way I do. But you know, that's it. So they don't even understand the constraints of their own religion.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. It was the ultimate hypocrisy is that being part of a religion means that you've got confines that you have to operate within. You haven't got total freedom. You've got freedom to be an arsehole, but that has consequences. And if you don't like the consequences, then you're going to conform to the rules. And if you think that you're going to burn in hell for eternity for coveting your neighbour's wife, which is a thought crime, by the way, which is what a lot of these freedom fighters are all against, then you're going to have to be pure of thought. If you're going to bear false witness against somebody, then you're going to burn in hell. So you better not lie. So they're constraints. They're constraints that you must comply with in order.
Moral precepts, ethics, on and on. And rule of law changes all the time. That's why we have lawmakers. That's why we have a Congress and a Senate and a government and all that kind of thing. So all these anti-government people, they're mad if they don't like the rule, and then they're happy if they like the rule. But then other people are mad at that rule and not mad at the other rule, and it's just absurd, right? So I want people to understand two things. The world's a black box, man. You don't know shit. That's number one. Yeah. You can make an effort to understand something if you want to, but it may take a lot of work. Passing the bar exam may take a lot of work. Becoming a brain surgeon may take a lot of work. You know, building a rocket engine may require you to do a lot of engineering classes or whatever, a lot of work. And just building the barn with your neighbors is going to require some work. So,
but you know, we've sort of over recent decades, we have started to deconstruct that and undermine that sort of thinking. If you want to build a rocket, and you say you want to go and do, you know, years of engineering study and physics and all this sort of stuff, just so someone like me with no education can come along and say, "Yeah, nah, mate, that's not going to fly. Yeah, no, nah." You know, so it's, in my opinion is just as valid as yours, you know, about whether it's going to fly or not. Oh, no, mate, that's a weird shape. I can't see how that's going to. But, yeah, you've just studied this and worked for 30 years to build this rocket based on all your knowledge, and it's the right shape and it's got the right amount of fuel. But in my opinion, apparently, in this day and age, it's just as valid for me to say, "No, you're wrong," even though I've got no experience in engineering or rocket science or anything like that.
And if you do the thinking, and if you do the designing, and if you do the empirical research and the studies and everything, you will figure out, we know it for a fact, how to make something fly, you know, a plane fly. And there'll be good ones and bad ones, and it'll evolve based on all of that.
But I think too that this whole I think one of the utopian theories or utopian concepts around virtual reality and a metaverse and that sort of thing is that it's pure freedom. It's, you can be who you want to be. There's no constraints from your childhood upbringing, which is bullshit. because you've got to access first. And if you were born in the wrong country to the wrong parents into the wrong socio-economic system, you're not going to get the same access to all of this as the son of an upper middle class doctor or lawyer.
And also, if you're just really stubbornly ignorant and you don't want to learn anything and you don't want to grow and you don't want to figure out how things work, you're going to be limited by your stupidity and ignorance too.
Yeah, and these people haven't created this because they've got some sort of world. What's the word for it? It's not a benevolent thing. They've created this because they've seen an opportunity to make money and create their own system. Mark Zuckerberg has created Facebook to be, so he could be master of his own universe. He's called his company Meta, so he could be master of his own universe. And to be part of that means that you've got to understand that you're not completely free. Just a little thing like saying the wrong thing on Facebook can get you booted, rightly or wrongly. The reality is it's a private company owned by somebody who makes the rules. You enter into this new way of looking at this new way of living. You are succumbing to the will and the wants of a Mark Zuckerberg type. So I can get all deep and philosophical and say, just like man made God in his own image, we're going to make Mark Zuckerberg a new God. And this might be his vision, that he will be the master of the universe. He will be the builder of all things. This will be something he's created. Now, you and I and our kids and grandkids walking into this might be a little bit more cynical, but within 2 generations, there'll be a generation that will know nothing other than that. And you only look at it now. Kids born today know how to use an iPhone before they know how to walk. This is what they're learning on, and that might be a good thing for development, but they get sucked into that whole sort of virtual world, and that becomes their world. And you start to get generations now that will know nothing else other than this virtual world, and what is said on Twitter and Facebook and whatever is going to be their reality. And who's going to be the master of that reality? Those few that are part of the creation. It's the guys that invented blockchain, and those who invented Facebook, and those who invented Google. They are the gatekeepers and the masters. Whilst it might not be one god, it might be more like ancient Greece. There'll be several gods, but they will be the masters.
Well, that's the way it is now, for sure.
Freedom. It is. There's no freedom.
And if you're talking about democratic systems and so on, you want to define that in a certain context. I like the decentralized thing and the open source thing and the smart contracts thing and the idea that we could have different currencies and so on. But we have to mesh all of this together and integrate it with our understanding of a lot of things, including energy and so on. And, it might be a good thing for me to launch a token that's called the Cospelon token and go on a market, an exchange, and offer that token and a smart contract about what Cospelon is here where I live. And I want to buy some old agricultural buildings and turn them into video and recording studios and whatnot. And I need people. And what we do is we farm, we hang out in the countryside, we go to the beach, and we do our media thing, and under our rules and our thing. But then we're also constrained by the rules of this country and this place where we are, and so on, and also our own abilities and skills and imagination and willingness to do things and willingness to cooperate. So. Are we going to be less competitive in the game sense? Are we going to be more cooperative? And by the way, there are models for this in the world and have been for a long time. Social democratic values. There's all kinds of co-ops that exist in Spain and in the States and all over the place that do things differently. There are different shareholding structures that you can come up with. There's tons of things, but now we're adding layers of complexity, more black boxes onto it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing and that I wouldn't use it like we're using this technology now. But we don't understand it. And what's worse is we don't even know how to frame things and think about things anyway, because we're not really criticizing our own thoughts and perspectives, and we're not making a big enough effort to understand how things are. Instead, we're just falling into these ideological tribes and creating all kinds of unnecessary conflicts and BS that are taking our eye off the ball. Therefore, we can't see the sixth extinction as a big thing. And global warming is going to be a controversy forever until circumstances dictate that we're all like dying because we can't get food or whatever. Who knows when and where and how that happens. But we tend to, like, instead of mitigating the risks that you're talking about, we just ignore them and we fight against their being there because ideologically it's uncomfortable. And I understand we're all really spoiled, especially me and you who come from very free democratic countries. We're extremely spoiled and entitled, and we think we have the right to do anything we want. And anybody who's going to like beg to differ and say, well, you know, you white folks do have an advantage here in this situation. We're saying, how dare you hate on white people? I'm a victim now, you know, but it's so silly. We get sidetracked with all this stuff because of our tendency to favor emotional states over the type 1 thinking, like Kahneman talks about or whatever. But that's the thing I just want to unpack, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, how do you bring people into a new way of doing things that's going to be useful and helpful and fun and good for you and, you know, safe and whatever, without just falling into another muddle of incomprehensible, like I said, black boxes all the way down, like the turtles all the way down, infinite regress of things we don't understand, but we're being manipulated all the time. And if you go back to the 50s and 60s where people were writing about propaganda and marketing and these kind of things, and you know, we really these technologies in terms of really thinking them through and applying them are relatively new. So getting us addicted to social media is a very new thing. But
well, I think that's a look. There's some stuff there for another conversation. But when we look at the metaverse, and I suppose during this conversation, I've been concentrating on the cautionary tale and all the negatives of the potential for this sort of thing. There is absolutely a lot of benefits to be gained from leveraging from this technology and getting into certain spaces within it. I just think that in a way we need to have that conversation about GameB and what do we need to prepare in ourselves and our communities about how we make that step where we get the best of literally both worlds, where we get the benefits of where this metaverse type Web3 and everything can take us. But we need to get certain things now in the current house in order first. We need to, and when we talk about tribalism, we've got to that point now where if you are here, then you believe in all these things. And if you're here, you believe in all these things. And if you don't believe in this, but you believe in that, then you've either got no team or you're kicked out and now you have to go and join the other team, right? We've got to get away from that thinking. We've got to start, when we talk about certain concepts, for instance, of what GameB could be or what we would like to be, we're touching on things that are going to trigger people, as in, you talk about doing something at a community level where everyone gets an equal opportunity, that can come and go and have that freedom within certain constraints. Some people might say New World Order and all the connotations with that term that have been developed over the last 40 years. Or people start saying, that sounds like socialism to me. Or they say, I'm a free market capitalist. And what I say to all of that is, what you've actually got to do is go, why are you a communist? Why are you a capitalist? Why are you a national socialist? Why are you anything? And deconstruct that yourself and say, what are the principles behind that I believe in, that I now call myself that? And there might be room when you look at, why are you a free market capitalist? Okay, because you believe in certain liberties, you believe in the ability, the freedom to be an entrepreneur, to create new things unconstrained. Well, okay, but there's still some wriggle room in there for compromise. And if you take those tenets and you can still apply them and not be a socialist, but you can still apply them into a community setting where it's more about not just the individual, but also the team. It's a long way of basically saying that I think that we need to deconstruct the tribes and deconstruct why we've entered willingly or otherwise.
I agree with you completely, and that's beautifully said. And it always brings me back to the same thing. How are you going to get people to understand markets and different concepts of markets throughout history? How are you going to get? When you talk about reading Hayek, for example, or Adam Smith, or understanding the magic of the invisible hand, or the faith elements in it, the belief elements in it, as opposed to the mechanical things of price discovery or resource management or product development, R&D, whatever. There's just so many elements there. And when somebody says socialism, what are you talking about? And, do you really know what you're talking about? What is neoliberalism? There's a lot of different ways to define it if you look into it really, really carefully. What is modern monetary theory? There's a lot of different angles to look at that thing. And what is cryptocurrency? What is currency? That's a huge discussion. And all of this, that's why I like philosophers like Karl Popper and other people. If you're reading Steven Pinker or whatever, it's not that they're perfectly right, but their thought processes are really good and should be emulated, because they're going back and reading these primary sources, understanding where these trends and ideas came from, how they've evolved over time, how they've gotten better or worse, how they get co-opted or bastardized and destroyed by different ideological trends and fashions and so on. And you're learning how to think, these buzz terms like critical thinking and whatnot, skepticism, the science or scientific method or anything like that. These things are big and important ideas, and we should understand what they are, where they came from, and how they've changed and evolved, and how they're evolving now, and these new applications. And are we just like circling around to the same mistakes because with new gadgets? Or is there something transformational? Like people use these terms like liminal or salient or whatever like that. Whatever. I mean, every generation or every 10 years or so, people are going to have different language to talk about these things, but we're still talking about the same things, you know. The difference is now, it seems to me, and this is where I really, really get passionate about it, we are facing some serious existential threats that I think are uncontroversial if you really look into them. That this, you know, it's the Seneca curve. When you're growing, you get to a certain point, you kind of plateau, and then when you stop growing, it goes down really quick. So it's like this, and then boom.
Yeah.
So that Seneca curve is just like life, you know. Gee, I thought I was young until I was 57, 4 months and 3 days, and then I just went off the cliff, you know. It's like, you know, I was young, I was growing, I was learning, I was getting richer or poorer or whatever. And suddenly, you know, bang, it's all over. And you wake up that one morning and you go, it doesn't get any better from here. You know, and you know it's true. I'm going to try to maintain as much as possible over the next 10 years and hope I don't get that much worse, you know. And then when I'm 80 or 90, I'm gone. And we don't understand life expectancy and what that means statistically. You know, you were much more likely to die before 5 years old and so on, and infectious diseases and how we conquered a lot of those and so on. So this whole idea about growth, what does growth mean? And when is it healthy and sustainable and kind of has a natural Seneca curve? And when does it just mean that if we keep going like this, we're going to be dead tomorrow? It's, you know, I'm 27 years old. I'm a rock star. I'm going to do a lot of drugs and drink a lot. I'm going to be dead in a few months, you know, kind of thing. And if not, I'm lucky, you know, I had the right genes, you know. Why do some rock stars live so long with the way they live? You know, they should be dead. You should be dead right now.
Well, you see that you've seen that picture of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and Adam points to this person and says, "What's he doing?" And God says, "I don't know. He was here when I got here," and it's Keith Richards. You know,
I love that.
So I think you're right. We get to a point, and we are growing, and we're living longer as a race. And even though the funny thing is, though, that we actually, humans are I think the only species that have at its disposal its means of self-destruction. And we're constantly, you know, inside that 5 minutes to midnight scenario. And I think we need to actually take stock of that and say, well, as Daniel Schmachtenberger has pointed out a number of times, the difference between our evolution and other animals' evolution is that we've been able to get outside of our immediate territory and adapt to other territories. And so we've moved, and we can go to Antarctica. As a human being, we've got no business being in Antarctica just on our own, but we've been able to adapt and make tools and clothes and technologies to be able to live in all parts of the world.
And also, just let me cut in real quick, and I won't throw you off, but it always cracks me up when I think about life expectancy, and I'm going, isn't it freaking great that we can live long enough to die of cancer and type 2 diabetes?
That's it. Some of these things that we're warned will kill us were never an issue 50 or 60 or 100 years ago, because we weren't living long enough to get them. Smoking didn't kill you of lung cancer, because you probably died of something else before the lung cancer kicked in. But we do have that adaptiveness, that ability to adapt and create our own environment or create protection against the environment means that we've been able to explore and we've been able to learn how to go further and further. But it also comes at a cost, and we seem to always like to look forward, but we haven't seen the destruction we're leaving behind us when we're doing it. And I think at this point in time, we need to really start having a look, and many people are trying to have a look at, yes, this is all great, you know, without fossil fuels, we wouldn't have some of the technologies that we've got these days. We wouldn't have the modern medicine, we wouldn't have the machines that keep us alive. But we need to mature beyond that point and say, yes, okay, we've exploited that and we've done it in a positive way. We're now starting to do it in a negative way. We need to start using, you can't build a wind farm without mining steel. You can't build a wind farm without burning fossil fuels to have the electricity to build the wind farm. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't build wind farms or solar farms, because they're not as going to be, they have the potential to take us where fossil fuels will eventually leave us. We still need centuries of supply of fossil fuels to make petrochemical materials. So it's just that we won't necessarily need it for fuel in the future. We might need it for other things. It's about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but saying, yes, we've done that, salute to what we've done, but it's not sustainable. We're going to have to do something different. And it's not just environmentally, but it's within ourselves, in our own well-being, in our thought process. Certain things that we thought back in the caveman times, we thought that for a legitimate survival reason. And you know, the basic example of that is we hear a rustle in the bush and we run the other way. Now, if it was just a cricket, then we didn't need to rush away. But if it was a snake, it was a good thing that we rushed away. Now we've got the technology to discern whether it was a cricket or a snake. So we don't have to react so violently against things. It's the same when new ideas come out. We don't have to react violently in reaction in a reactionary way to new ideas. We have the ability, we have the maturity and the smarts now to actually explore the ideas without fear.
Yeah.
And then we can come to our own conclusions. They might be a shit idea, or there might be components of that idea that we could take forward with us. But we've got to that tribal state where we've devolved into the fear. And there are forces out there that make money and they get status and everything of perpetuating and that fear and even creating some of it. You know, certain talking heads on TV are paid tens of millions of dollars a year to validate your fears, because it's in their interest that you remain fearful. Yeah. We need to start, like I said before, deconstructing our own thoughts and saying, right, this is my principle, but why do I have that principle? It's because of these things. Well, actually, it turns out that's reasonably compatible with your principles on many levels. I don't have to be violently against you because of two components of your principle. You know, that cliche of let's first identify what we agree on before we start discussing what we don't agree on. We need to get back to something like that. And as you said before, so many things have been bastardized along the way that it was probably a good good strategy at the time, or it was a good thought at the time. It was a good invention at the time. I said before, you know, a lot of the stuff that a lot of the technologies that have been advanced that were ideally there to benefit humankind, the only reason that the R&D and the finance and everything was put to it was because it could also be weaponized. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about things like the metaverse and Web3, is that there's all this great stuff, But what is the reason and the motivation behind the people that are creating it? They're not doing it because they're just great blokes. They will want their cut. They will want their return on investment. So, you know, identifying that and coming up with strategies to counter some of the more negative aspects of it isn't communism. It isn't socialism. It's basic common sense that before you embark on something, you don't drive through water without getting out and checking its depth. And we should be doing that as this new opportunities come. We shouldn't be fearful of them.
Right.
We should explore them, but we need to be cautious, and we need to build, you know, you go through that water, you find out it's too deep, but you've still got to get to the other side. So you either build a bridge or you work out a way of lowering the water level or something. But that's what you've got to do with.
And I think, yeah, everything you just said, yeah. And I think what we're doing is the kind of important step or process. You have a lot of people having this conversation, not enough, but a lot. Much is being written and has been written. You have efficient communicators like Jamie Wheel and Jim Rutt and Daniel Schmachenberger, more abstract ones like Jordan Hall, but that's just in that little GameB community, more or less, that kind of rebel wisdom thing. But there are lots of other communities around the world doing similar stuff that we may not recognize or know about. And the one thing that characterizes all of it is people sitting down and talking to one another about this stuff and making it a relevant conversation to have, as opposed to, you know, when you're down the Circle K having a few beers with some friends from, you know, the deep South, and you're discussing things that they're not very familiar with, but you're having a fine, amicable, friendly conversation. It's not that efficient. It's not Jamie Wheel riffing, you know, where he just comes right off the top of his head with a whole bunch of beautiful stuff that I'm totally familiar with. It could have come out of my head, believe it or not, but I just can't communicate that efficiently. And if you and I sit down and talk about this stuff, it's going to take us time to figure out where we're going with it and to explore different avenues and different things and find out what we're trying to understand. And then if we can help each other understand it and whatnot, people need to do this. And there are a lot of communities on the internet, and there are a lot of forums and ways we can do this, but it has to be done because it's the only way we're going to inspire people to educate themselves to at least the minimum degree of understanding that the world we live in is black boxes all the way down. And we have to start to recognize that and figure out a way we can engage with those things so that we can figure out how to use them in a positive way that's not going to kill us all. And by the way, my thing about it is, why should I care? Why aren't I Jamie Dimon? If I were smart, I would have just gone to Ivy League schools and found a mentor and become a rich and powerful banker. And I'm just an idiot, a fool for not having done that. Because if I were rich, I could use more energy in a year than Nigerians do. You know, more energy in a day than Nigeria does in a year or whatever. But, you know, it's like, I'm a billionaire. I use shitloads of energy because I can. And you're an idiot because you don't.
But you see, it's okay because you paid for it. That's fine.
Right, exactly. I earned it. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and I made myself. I'm self-made. Yeah. So that's all foolish, but I want to kind of wind down the conversation now by just leaving on that note that, you know, for us, you and me as friends, we're going to have inefficient, wandering conversations about stuff we're exploring because we're curious about it, because we're friendly people. And maybe something will come out of it that's practical and interesting and actually does some good, or maybe not. Like, I'm not totally obsessed with the GameB community or anything. I just think it's another community in which I can explore my values that are very important to me. And one of those things is just how are we going to deal with continuing the kind of brilliant progress that we have and not kill our civilization. And I'm worried that with the Seneca curve type of thing, that we're hitting a growth apex or the top of growth. And we have to redefine growth because the kind of growth we have now isn't sustainable. And when that falls off, it's going to fall off fast. So it's like you pull that little brick out and the whole tower just falls down suddenly, and it happens really quick. I'm not saying I know, because I'm not Elon Musk, so I don't know anything, but I'm not saying it's going to happen like, next year. like the third quarter next year, I think, this whole house of cards is coming down. So what you really need to do is buy a whole bunch of ammo, put a fence around your house, let all the marauding morons and crazy barbarians know exactly where you're keeping your stash of wine and beer, so they can come and take it all away from you. But you'll be able to fight them off for at least 3 or 4 days if you're prepared, if you're prepped properly. So my thing is like, let's not prep for that. Let's prep for not having to have to do that. Let's prep for really lovely neighbors, and lovely projects, and lovely things we can do together, and a different kind of growth that's fun and safe. I live in a really nice place, so I never feel a threat of anything. But that doesn't mean that they're not there, And it's just like you said with your analogies to the safety thing. It's like, maybe the technology is really helping us a lot, but relying on it completely is foolish. It's foolish. We still should know how these things work. Like, I saw an antique hand pump at the market the other day, and it's just such a cool thing. And I would have bought it, but it just wasn't operable, and I didn't want to rebuild it. But I want one of those things. You can put the hose down the well, you can pump up the water, or you can put the hose in your water catch system, pump it, get it out into the garden, but you're using your own energy, physical energy to do it. And I don't, it's not complicated. You can fix it and rebuild it and repaint it. And it's been working for decades and decades and decades. It's going to work for. So, there's a balance between being dependent on all this technology and being independent from it and knowing how things work. So what's the human capacity for an average individual like you and me to understand how things work? And most of us have no idea. We're not that well bred or educated. We don't come from a background of privilege where we had every opportunity to grow and learn. And so, you can't expect these people to understand stuff. You want to sit down with J.P. Sears, who's a funny and intelligent guy, and say, okay, let's talk about freedom, what it means to you, how you get it, how you maintain it, what you should be free to do and not free to do in a civilized society of people where we can have maximum benefit off of everything. So, that's the thing. And having the opportunity to talk to you and just have a chat and go through these things is a great thing. And everybody should be doing it more and more. We should be doing it in our community as well, inviting people to come together face to face and discuss things and get to know each other and understand each other. Because if we just stick to this information fire hose, it's going to blow our brains out. It's just going to and the CSI is going to have to come in and do the pattern recognition thing for
but I think you struck on a good point there, that look, at the end of the day, you can go to university and you can spend your whole life being a professor at a university, thinking about all these deep things and reading widely and and all that sort of stuff. But eventually someone's got to go to a tech college and learn how to be a plumber to give you the water so that you can sit there in your office and contemplate the world. So it's not in our interest that everyone sits down and tries to learn everything there is to know about everything. We just need to set aside some time in our own way to educate ourselves the best we can, whether it be reading books or audio books or reading articles and listening to intelligent people talk about the work they've been doing. We just need to do that. We don't need to all be professors of philosophy and physics and all that, but we need to then rebuild the trust that we have in the people that are doing that work. The guys that are building buildings, the guys that are putting the plumbing in, the guys, the electricians, the truck drivers, and the bankers and the doctors and all that, all doing their bit. But we just need to.
Yeah, we've got to get out of our bubble. And and our ego bubble too, because it's a big ego trip, right? I'm hanging around with people who think like me and have the same ideology and beliefs and all that stuff.
But that's where we need the guys that do have the time, who have had the time to study for 20, 30, 40, 50 years about these things. They need to probably work on a way of communicating this back down the line to those of everyone else who have actually been doing real jobs.
Because when I was young, I knew a lot of intellectuals, and they were all carpenters, bartenders, plumbers, and insurance salesmen. So in the olden days, when I was a kid in San Francisco or whatever, I'd go to the cafe and we'd have deep discussions. I mean, I'm talking about deep. And these people were well read and they were smart people, but they were working people. They were just workers. And I had no way of accessing, I'm going to talk with Noam Chomsky tomorrow. We're going to do something. He's going to come on, whatever, so we had no way of doing this, accessing all this intellectual superpower energy out there in the world.
Yeah.
And now we do, but we have to understand that all of us are smart people too, and we have to take responsibility to share what we know and help people understand how things work. And then you say, okay, I really don't know anything about aeronautics. I don't. Yeah. And I don't know how to take a photo with a shallow depth of field, whatever. But I could learn that. You could show me.
We need to, like I said, we need to rebuild that trust so that when you do come across someone who does know about aeronautics and you want to get the Reader's Digest version of what you need to know, then you need to trust that what they're telling you is correct. And sometimes that does take pure trust, because you're not going to be able to fact check them or anything like that immediately. And not just dismiss what they're saying as bullshit because you don't understand it. And there's so many things that it doesn't matter whether you're a physics professor or a theologian or or a tradesman. There are things that you just don't know, and you're never going to know, no matter how much study you do. So at some point, you've got to trust the people who have specialised in that area,
right?
And give you the basics.
And consultants, they like to use language in new ways. Like we talk about in relationship. We have to have these discussions in relationship. Well, come on. We need to have relationships again. That's how you build trust, right? Not by othering, not by pointing the finger out there and saying, these guys aren't like me. They're dehumanization, othering, cancel culture, politically correctness, and identity politics, and all this stuff. These are layers of garbage distractions. We need to have relationships again, so we can say, okay, you're totally different, but we can have a relationship, a certain kind of relationship. We have to learn how to build those again. But I'm going to have to stop now, Blood, because an hour 42 minutes, and we were talking without recording the sound for another 20 minutes before.
Which was all our best stuff.
Yeah, I was on a roll, man. I came in there, introduced the topic and all that, and then we spun off in other directions. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, the metaverse thing, I think we need to understand how things work. But anyway, I'll leave it at that, and let's talk again next week, Glenn.
Sounds great.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mick. I appreciate you.
Mate. Same here.
Okay, cheers, buddy.
See you,
Gotta
mate.
figure out how to stop recording. Where did I put this thing? Okay. End. I put end. Yeah, I'm gonna click end. End.
See ya.